For God's sake, Nana, could you at least look a little more pathetic? The camera's rolling. The words sliced through the fog of pain. Not the sharp, immediate agony from my hip, but a different kind of pain. A cold, hollow ache that started in my chest and spread through my limbs, leaving them numb. My cheek was pressed against the polished hardwood floor, the scent of lemon polish and old wood filling my nostrils. I had planned the fall, but I hadn't planned for the sheer, naked contempt in her voice. It was a whisper, meant only for me, a venomous secret shared between the actress and her unwilling prop. A moment later, her voice changed, pitching itself into a high, theatrical sob that echoed through the cavernous living room. "Oh my God. Nana! Someone help! My Nana's fallen!" I kept my eyes closed, focusing on the grain of the wood inches from my face. This was the moment, the pivot. For months, I had watched her. Chloe, my grandson Leo's wife. I had watched her kindness, a thing as thin and brittle as spun sugar, presented for public consumption and dissolving into acid the moment the audience was gone. I had sold my home, the house my dear Mark and I had built, the house where we'd raised our daughter, so they could have the down payment for this one. I'd moved into their guest house, believing in the promises of family, of being cared for in my twilight years. Instead, I'd become a background character in the Chloe show. The sound of her frantic footsteps wasn't toward me, but away. I knew what she was doing. I heard the familiar soft chime of her phone unlocking, the tap-tap-tap of her getting the camera ready. Then, the footsteps returned, slower this time, more deliberate. I felt the air shift as she knelt beside me, not to help, but to frame the perfect shot. "Oh, my poor, sweet Nana," she cooed, her voice thick with manufactured grief. I could feel the heat of the phone's lens near my face. "She's so fragile. I keep telling her to be careful." Her hand, cool and weighted with expensive rings, rested on my shoulder, but there was no comfort in the touch. It was a placement, a pose. I imagined the screen, my crumpled form, her perfectly made-up face streaked with a single, artful tear. The caption was already writing itself in my mind. "It's so hard watching the ones you love fade away. Please send prayers. #family first. #eldercare. #angel in disguise." That's when the switch flipped inside me. It wasn't a conscious thought, not a grand cinematic decision. It was an instinct, a primal act of self-preservation. My plan had been simple. A fall, a scare, a way to make them pay more attention. But her whisper, her camera, it demanded more. It demanded a ghost. My breathing hitched. My eyes, when I finally forced them open, were deliberately unfocused. I let them drift past her, past the phone, to a point on the ceiling. I allowed a fine tremor to start in my hand. And when I tried to speak, I made sure the words were a jumble of disconnected syllables, a loose thread pulled from the tapestry of my memory. The blue, Mark's blue, clock. Chloe's performance faltered for a fraction of a second. I saw it in the slight widening of her eyes, the flicker of confusion before the mask snapped back into place. "Shh, Nana, it's okay," she soothed, patting my shoulder again, this time with a little more force, as if to say, "Stay on script. The ambulance is on its way. We'll get you help." The paramedics were kind, efficient, their voices a low murmur of professional concern as they checked my vitals and asked me questions I couldn't or wouldn't answer. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name? Do you know where you are?" I looked at the young man's earnest face and felt a pang of guilt. I was lying to him, to these people who saved lives for a living. But then I saw Chloe in the doorway, phone still held discreetly at her side, her expression a perfect blend of anxiety and sorrow for the benefit of the emergency crew. The guilt vanished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I let out a soft moan and mumbled something about the gardenias Mark used to grow. As they lifted me onto the gurney, my house slid past me in a strange, disoriented blur. The grandfather clock in the hall, the landscape painting Mark had bought on our honeymoon, the worn armchair where I used to read to a young Leo. Each object was a memory, a part of a life that Chloe was trying to erase. She followed the gurney, her hand on my arm, a vision of dutiful love. "I'm right here, Nana. I won't leave you." But as they wheeled me out the front door into the blinding afternoon sun, I saw her reflection in the glass. Her head was bowed, not in prayer, but to look at her phone. A small, triumphant smile touched her lips as she watched the little hearts and comments begin to flood her screen. The game had begun, and she had no idea she wasn't the only one playing. The hospital was a symphony of sanitized chaos, beeps, rushed footsteps, the sterile scent of antiseptic that always reminded me of Mark's final days. They moved me from the emergency bay to a small, curtained-off room. A doctor with tired eyes shone a light in my pupils and asked me the same questions. I gave him the same broken answers. My mind was a fortress, and I had pulled up the drawbridge. I let them poke and prod, attach wires to my chest, and slide a needle into the back of my hand. I was a doll, pliant and silent. Chloe was a constant, fluttering presence, retelling the story of my tragic fall to every nurse who would listen, her voice dripping with a sorrow that made my teeth ache. She answered their questions for me. "Oh, she's been getting so confused lately," she'd say, with a sad shake of her head. "Forgetting names, where she puts things. I was so worried something like this would happen." She was building her case, brick by brick, right in front of me, and I let her. Eventually, the doctor came back with a clipboard and a grave expression. He spoke to Chloe in low, serious tones, believing me to be lost in my own fog. "The scans don't show any acute injury from the fall, which is good news, but based on her presentation and what you've told me about her recent behavior, we're looking at a case of profound amnesia. It could be post-traumatic, or it could be the onset of a more progressive condition. Early-stage dementia isn't out of the question. We'll need to do more tests." The words hung in the air, a formal diagnosis of the lie I had constructed. Chloe's breath caught in a perfect, heartbroken gasp. "Oh, doctor." My poor Nana. They gave me a mild sedative to keep me calm, and after Chloe signed a mountain of paperwork, the nurses dimmed the lights. I closed my eyes, regulating my breathing to mimic the slow, deep rhythm of a drugged sleep. The fortress was quiet. I was alone with my thoughts, the doctor's words echoing in my head. Profound amnesia. Dementia. It was more than I had hoped for. A perfect, impenetrable shield. Hours melted away. I drifted in and out of a light, genuine doze, the sedative making my limbs feel heavy. But a part of my mind remained on high alert, a sentinel at the gate. I was awakened not by a sound, but by a presence. The air shifted. The curtain rustled almost silently. I kept my breathing even, my eyes shut. I smelled her perfume, a cloying floral scent that always seemed to precede her like a warning. It was Chloe. I thought she had come to check on me, perhaps to perform another act of compassion for a passing nurse. But she was silent. I heard the faint click of her purse opening, then the soft taps of fingers on a phone screen. A moment later, a voice, but not hers. It was Leo, my grandson. His voice was tinny and distant through the phone's speaker, but it was him. "Is she asleep?" he asked, his tone flat, devoid of concern. Then came Chloe's voice. No longer the high-pitched, caring tone she used in public. This was her real voice. A low, conspiratorial hiss, sharp and cold as ice. Out like a light. The doctor gave her something. "Leo, you're not going to believe this. It's better than we could have ever planned." My heart, which had been beating in a slow, sedated rhythm, gave a painful lurch. I forced my body to remain still, a statue of slumber. "What did the doctor say?" Leo asked. "He basically handed her to us on a silver platter," Chloe whispered, a giddy, triumphant cruelty lacing her words. "Profound amnesia," he said. He even used the word dementia. He's already convinced she's lost her mind. The paperwork will be a formality. Paperwork. My blood ran cold. "So, the power of attorney?" Leo's voice was hesitant, but the greed was there, an ugly undercurrent. "Exactly," Chloe breathed. We can finally get legal guardianship, total control. And you know what that means. There was a pause. I could imagine her eyes scanning the empty room, ensuring they were alone. That creepy art collection your grandfather left her. You know, the one she keeps locked up in that temperature-controlled storage unit? Mark's art, his passion, his one true indulgence. He wasn't a rich man, but he had an eye. He collected works from unknown, emerging artists long before they became famous. It was his legacy, our legacy. I did some digging after you mentioned the artist's name on that one painting, the one with the crow, Chloe continued, her voice dripping with avarice. Leo, we're not talking about a few $1,000s. Some of those pieces, they've sold at auction for millions. Millions, honey. We are going to be so rich. A wave of nausea washed over me. It felt more violent than the fall itself. This wasn't just about money. It was about the desecration of memory. It was about erasing Mark, about taking the last, most precious piece of him I had left and selling it to the highest bidder. And her? Leo asked. The question was a flimsy shield of conscience. What about Nana? Chloe let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound utterly devoid of humor. It was the sound of a predator closing in on its prey. What about her? She scoffed. She'll be comfortable. We'll find a nice, clean facility for her. She won't know the difference. The old bat will never know what hit her. The finality of those words struck me with the force of a physical blow. The old bat. In that moment, I was no longer Anna Miller, beloved wife of Mark, mother, grandmother. I was an obstacle, a senile relic, an old bat standing between them and a life of luxury. The love I had poured into Leo his entire life, the bedtime stories, the scraped knees I had bandaged, the pride I felt at his graduation, it all curdled into poison in my veins. The curtain rustled again, and she was gone. The only evidence she had been there was the lingering scent of her perfume and the venom of her words, which now hung in the sterile air of the hospital room. I did not move. I did not open my eyes. I lay perfectly still, a stone in the dark, and let the shock crystallize into something else, something hard and sharp and patient. The game had changed. This was no longer about teaching them a lesson. This was about survival, and I would survive. They thought I was a ghost, a fading memory in my own life. They were about to find out how much a ghost can see. My name is Anna Miller. I am 72 years old, though some days, in the silent, sterile spaces of this house, I feel as ancient as the paper in the books I used to mend. For 45 years, I was a librarian. Not a glorious title, perhaps, but it was my world, a world of quiet dignity, of hushed reverence for the stories that lined the shelves. I loved the scent of old paper and binding glue, the soft thud of a returned book on the counter, the way a child's eyes would light up when they found a story that spoke to them. My life had an order, a gentle rhythm dictated by the Dewey Decimal System and the changing seasons outside the library's large, paned windows. My husband, Mark, understood that rhythm. He was a brilliant man, an art historian with a mind that moved in ways I could only marvel at, but he was a quiet man. Our life together wasn't one of grand pronouncements, but of comfortable, shared silences. I remember the weight of his arm around my shoulders as we'd sit on our porch in the evenings, the scent of the pipe tobacco he so loved mingling with the jasmine climbing the trellis. He never needed to say much. I could read his heart in the way he'd carefully restore a chipped frame on one of his paintings, or in the soft smile that would touch his lips when I'd bring him a cup of tea, just the way he liked it. He saw the world in colors and textures, and I saw it in words and chapters. Together, we created our own complete story. That story included our grandson, Leo. When his parents, my own daughter and her husband, chose careers over a cradle, we didn't hesitate. Leo became our son in every way that mattered. I was the one who kissed his scraped knees, who taught him how to read, using the very picture books I checked out from my own library. Mark was the one who taught him how to see the beauty in a simple sunset, to appreciate the craft in an old piece of furniture. Our house, The one Mark had inherited from his parents became Leo's world. His height was marked in pencil on the kitchen doorframe, a testament to his growth under our roof. The scent of my baking was a constant presence, a warm blanket of comfort. That house wasn't just wood and nails. It was a living, breathing archive of our love, of our family. Then, Mark was gone. A sudden, senseless accident on a rain-slicked road, and my world of quiet order was shattered into a million pieces. The silence in the house was no longer comfortable. It was a screaming void. For a while, I simply existed, a ghost in my own memories. But Leo had met Chloe. She was vibrant and loud, all bright smiles and ambitious plans. She filled the silence, and for a time, I was grateful. When they announced their engagement, they spoke of their dreams, a big house in a good neighborhood, a place to build their own future. But they couldn't afford it. They looked at me with such hopeful eyes, and I saw my chance to do one last thing for my Mark, for our Leo. So I sold it. I sold our home. I packed away 45 years of memories into cardboard boxes. I said goodbye to the porch where Mark and I had watched 1,000 sunsets, to the kitchen doorframe with Leo's pencil marks, to the scent of jasmine and old books. I signed the papers, and the proceeds became the down payment for this sprawling, modern house they now owned. This cold, echoing place with its white walls and sharp angles. I took the small guest house out back, a space no bigger than my old living room. I told myself it was the right thing to do. I told myself that family was the only asset that truly mattered, the only investment that would never depreciate. I moved in, believing I was securing a place in their lives, in their hearts. I believed in the story of a grateful grandson and his loving wife caring for the matriarch who had given them everything. I was such a fool. The story I had chosen to believe in was a work of pure fiction. My days now are measured not by the turning of pages, but by the flash of a smartphone camera. Chloe's Instagram account has become a digital shrine to her supposed sacrifice. I am the central relic in this exhibit of her compassion. One morning, the sun is barely up, casting long shadows across the immaculate kitchen floor. I am sitting at the table, a bowl of gray, lukewarm oatmeal in front of me. I haven't touched it. My mind, sharp as a tack behind this carefully constructed veil of confusion, is replaying the doctor's words, Chloe's crocodile tears. Suddenly, the air shifts. Chloe enters, not in her usual scowl and sweatpants, but dressed in soft pastel loungewear, her hair perfectly tousled. She's holding her phone. A bright, saccharine smile is plastered on her face. "Good morning, Nana Anna," she coos, her voice a full octave higher than it was 10 minutes ago when she slammed the bowl down. She glides over, phone held aloft, recording. "Time for our breakfast. We have to keep our strength up, don't we?" She kneels beside my chair, angling the phone to capture both her beatific, caring expression and my vacant stare. She dips the spoon into the slop and brings it to my lips. I let a little dribble down my chin, playing my part. She gently dabs it away with a napkin, her touch feather light for the camera's benefit. "There we go," she whispers, her eyes fixed on her own reflection on the screen. "Taking care of my favorite girl." Later, I see the post. The video is edited with soft, uplifting music. The caption reads, "Every day is a gift. Starting the morning by caring for my wonderful grandma-in-law. It's not always easy, but family is everything. So blessed to be able to do this for her." Family first. #caring for our elders. #grandma love. Influencer. Life. #sacrifice. The comments flood in by the hundreds. "You are an angel on earth, Chloe." "Leo is so lucky to have a wife like you." This brought tears to my eyes, a true inspiration. Each comment is a small, sharp stab of poison. They are applauding my captor. They are celebrating my slow erasure. The moment she hits post and the phone is locked, the performance ends, the curtain falls, the angelic smile evaporates, melting into a sneer of pure contempt. The warmth in her eyes turns to ice. "For God's sake, can you just eat?" she hisses, her voice low and sharp. She shoves the bowl closer to me, the spoon clattering against the ceramic. I don't have all day to play nursemaid for your little show." She walks away, leaving me in the echoing silence of the kitchen. I am no longer Nana Anna, the beloved elder. I am a prop that has served its purpose. A burden. I am a ghost in the house built from the bones of my past, a silent witness to a horror story being written in real time, one filtered, hashtagged post at a time. I stare at the oatmeal, the cold gray mass, a perfect reflection of the life they have made for me. And I know, with a chilling certainty, that this is only the beginning. The first sign of the cage wasn't the lock on the door, but the eye in the corner of the room. It arrived on a Tuesday, I think. The days had started to blur, smeared together by a deliberate, draining monotony. A man in a blue jumpsuit came, smelling of sawdust and stale coffee. He didn't look at me, his focus entirely on the drill in his hand. Chloe stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a portrait of performative concern. "It's for your safety, Nana," she chirped, her voice loud enough for the workman to hear. "With your condition, I worry so much." "This way, I can check on you from my phone, make sure you're okay, even when I'm in the kitchen." The drill whined, a high-pitched scream that vibrated through my bones. I watched as he mounted the small, white plastic dome to the ceiling, a sterile, unblinking pupil aimed directly at my bed. He did the same in the living room, then the hallway that led to the bathroom. My world, already shrinking, was now under constant, silent surveillance. A digital prison. That evening, the true purpose of the cameras became sickeningly clear. I had been sitting in my armchair, watching the dust motes dance in the afternoon sun, a small, simple pleasure they hadn't yet stolen. I reached for the tablet on the side table, the one I used to read the news and play simple card games. My fingers brushed against empty air. I looked around, feigning confusion. "Looking for this, sweetie?" Chloe's voice came from behind me. I turned slowly. She was holding the tablet, her smile a thin, sharp line. "I think this is all a bit too much for you now. The bright screen, all the buttons. It's confusing for you. Best we put it away." She patted my hand, a gesture that was meant to look comforting but felt like the closing of a fist. Her eyes were as cold and empty as the lens of the new camera above me. She placed the tablet on a high shelf in the main living area, a place I could never reach without a step stool I was forbidden to use. The next to go was the telephone. It was an old landline, a comforting weight in my hand. Chloe found me with the receiver to my ear one afternoon, listening to the dial tone. I wasn't calling anyone. I just missed the sound of a potential connection to the outside world. "Oh, Nana," she sighed, a long, theatrical sound of exasperation. She gently pried the receiver from my fingers. "Who were you trying to call? You know you get confused. You might call a wrong number, bother people. It's for the best." She unplugged the phone from the wall, the cord snaking behind her like a dead thing as she carried it out of the room. I was now completely cut off. My prison guards weren't just the cameras. They were the silence, the isolation, the calculated removal of every tool that defined my independence. I was no longer a person living in their guest house. I was an object to be managed. The days bled into one another, each one a new lesson in humiliation. The cruelty grew bolder, no longer hiding behind a thin veil of concern. It became the very air I breathed. It started at the dinner table, or rather, my table. They still ate at the large, polished oak table in the dining room, the one Mark and I had picked out decades ago. Laughter would drift from that room, the rich clinking of silverware against heavy ceramic plates, the murmur of their voices. My meals were served separately. At first, it was a small tray in my armchair. Then, Chloe brought in a flimsy metal card table and set it up in the corner of the living room, just outside the dining room's archway. My own little leper's colony. I had one chair, a hard, straight-backed thing that made my bones ache. I was close enough to hear their conversation, but far enough to be completely excluded from it. And the food, oh, the food. The aroma of their dinners would fill the house. Roast chicken with rosemary, sizzling steak, garlic bread. My plate, or rather my bowl, held my own special meal. It was always a pale, lukewarm concoction, Watery oatmeal for dinner, a few spoonfuls of bland, overboiled vegetables floating in a thin broth. Sometimes, a small piece of chicken, boiled to a rubbery, tasteless pulp. It was served in a thick plastic bowl, the kind you give to a toddler with a matching plastic spoon. The indignity was the point. They wanted me to feel less than human. One evening, the smell of grilled salmon was particularly strong. Leo had brought home a bottle of white wine, and I could hear the pop of the cork, followed by Chloe's delighted laugh. I sat at my little table, staring into a bowl of what looked like mashed potatoes, but had the consistency and flavor of wallpaper paste. "She just stared at the wall for a full hour today," I heard Chloe say, her voice carrying clearly into my corner. There was a note of amusement in it, like she was describing the antics of a strange pet. I waved my hand in front of her face and everything, nothing, completely gone. I didn't look up. I focused on the gray paste in my bowl. I could feel their eyes on me, even though I couldn't see them. I was a piece of furniture that breathed, a cautionary tale they observed from a comfortable distance. "Don't, Chloe," Leo murmured. His voice was low, tired. "Don't what, honey?" she replied, her tone turning sharp. "Don't state the obvious. It's the truth. The doctor said this would happen. We need to be realistic." Silence. I waited, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I waited for Leo to defend me, to say, "She's my grandmother," or "Show some respect," or even just, "Please, not while she's right there." But he said nothing. I heard the scrape of his fork on his plate. He just kept eating. His silence wasn't just an absence of words, it was an agreement, a blade twisting in my heart. He was my boy, my Leo. I had held him as a baby, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine. I had read him stories and bandaged his scraped knees. I had sold my home, the house filled with memories of his grandfather, to give them the down payment for this very house. And he sat there, 20 feet away, chewing his salmon while his wife dismantled my dignity, piece by piece. His silence was the cruelest sound of all. The verbal jabs became part of the daily routine. They stopped using my name. I was her, or the old woman. "Did you give her her pills?" Leo would ask, walking in from work. "Of course," Chloe would snap back, as if he'd accused her of incompetence. She spit one of them out, though, had to scoop it off the floor and put it back in her mouth. Disgusting. She said this as I sat in my chair watching them. Her words were stones, and she threw them directly at me, wanting to see if I'd flinch. I never did. My face remained a placid mask of senile indifference. Inside, I was collecting every insult, every slight hardening them into armor. The television was another battlefield. I used to enjoy the old black and white movies they showed in the afternoons. It was a window into a world I remembered. One day I turned it on, and the screen remained black. A small message appeared. Parental lock engaged. Chloe had locked me out of the television. "Too much noise and flashing lights, Nana," she explained later, not even bothering to sound convincing anymore. "It agitates you." So I sat in silence. The silence of the house was punctuated only by the sounds of their lives. The ping of Chloe's phone as she got another notification on her social media. The bass thumping from Leo's video games in their bedroom. And the constant, almost imperceptible electronic hum of the cameras, watching, always watching. I was a ghost in my own life, haunting the periphery of their happiness. The breaking point, the moment the dull ache of despair sharpened into the cold, clear focus of rage, came on an afternoon when the sky was a brilliant, unforgiving blue. I had been playing my part exceptionally well that day, spending the morning rearranging the throw pillows on my chair into nonsensical patterns. I needed a reason, a plausible excuse to get close to the nerve center of their operation, Chloe's desk in the small home office off the living room. I shuffled over to her, my hand trembling slightly, a tremor I didn't have to fake. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "Mark," I mumbled, using my late husband's name. "Photo. Mark." I pointed vaguely toward the office. "Album. On the shelf." Chloe let out a long, put-upon sigh. Annoyance flickered across her face before being replaced by the mask of patient caregiver. This was a good performance for the cameras. The photo album? Okay, Nana, okay, sit down. I'll get it for you. She guided me back to my chair with a firm hand on my elbow and then walked into the office. I heard the faint click of the old safe she used for documents, the one that used to be mine. Her back was to the doorway. This was my chance. It was a risk, a huge one, but the alternative, this slow, living burial, was no longer an option. My eyes, trained by years of quiet observation as a librarian, darted around her desk. It was a mess of papers, makeup palettes, and influencer paraphernalia. But there, sitting squarely in the center, next to her laptop, was a thick stack of papers bound by a large metal clip. The top page was heavy, cream-colored paper, legal letterhead. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't read the name of the law firm from this distance, but I could see the bold heading, Petition for Conservatorship. And then I saw it. On the final page of the document, which was slightly offset from the rest, was the signature line. Anna Miller. It was a clumsy, terrible forgery. My signature was a product of a lifetime of practice, an elegant flowing script. This was a child's imitation. The A was too round, the M too jagged. The loops were shaky, the pressure uneven. It was a crude attempt to steal my identity, my future, my very self. The sound of the world around me faded to a dull roar. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic, Chloe's movements in the office, it all disappeared. All I could hear was the frantic pounding of my own blood in my ears. All I could see was that grotesque scribble where my name should be. They weren't just waiting for me to fade away. They weren't just content to let nature and time run its course. They were actively, legally trying to erase me. The cameras, the tasteless food, the isolation, the constant whispers of contempt. It wasn't just casual cruelty. It was a strategy, a methodical campaign to build a case, to prove to the world that I was no longer there, so they could justify signing my life away. Chloe emerged from the office, holding an old, dusty photo album. She had a triumphant little smile on her face, the smile of someone who had successfully humored a difficult child. "Here you go, Nana," she said, placing the heavy book in my lap. "Happy now?" I looked down at the forged signature in my mind's eye, then up at her smiling face. The mask of the doddering, confused old woman was cemented in place, but behind my vacant eyes, a fire had been lit. It wasn't the wild, consuming fire of rage, but something colder, more patient. It was the slow, burning ember of a plan. They thought they were writing the final chapter of my life. They had no idea I was about to start a new one. And in my story, I was the one holding the pen. The gray fog I had so carefully constructed around myself, the one that kept me safe in my feigned dementia, was suddenly pierced by a beam of light so sharp and clear it felt like an electric shock. It wasn't a sight or a sound from the present, but a memory, arriving unbidden and with perfect, chilling clarity. It was Mark. My Mark. A week, maybe less, before the screech of tires and the call that had shattered my world. We were in his study, the room smelling of old books and his pipe tobacco. He had been agitated, pacing in a way that was unusual for him. He stopped, took my arm, his grip not painful but urgent, imprinting his words onto my very bones. "Anna," he'd said, his eyes locking onto mine, bypassing all the casual pleasantries of a decades-long marriage and speaking to a deeper part of me. "Listen, I need you to remember a phrase. Don't write it down. Just hold it in your mind. It might sound like nonsense, but it's the most important key I'll ever give you." I had smiled then, a gentle, patronizing smile. "All right, my dear, what's the grand secret?" His face remained serious, the lines around his eyes etched with a gravity I didn't understand. "When the raven flies at midnight, call the hawk." He repeated it. "When the raven flies at midnight, call the hawk." Can you say it back? I had recited it, feeling a little foolish, like a child learning a nursery rhyme. I dismissed it as one of his eccentricities, another of his little games of intrigue and mystery that he so loved. He was an accountant, for goodness sake, not a spy. But now, sitting in the cold silence of the guest house, the hum of Chloe's influencer-grade ring light a distant mockery. The words echoed back not as nonsense, but as a lifeline thrown across time from a man who knew he was in danger. The raven, a symbol of ill omen, of secrets. Midnight, the darkest hour. Chloe was the raven, and her flight was the slow, methodical theft of my life. It was time to call the hawk. The burner phone was an old habit of Mark's, another one of his just-in-case quirks, a cheap, prepaid flip phone he kept in the false bottom of a hollowed-out copy of Moby Dick. He'd told me it was in case of a natural disaster, if the cell towers ever went down. I knew now it was for a disaster of a different kind. Getting to it was an operation worthy of the spies in his novels. I had to wait for one of Chloe's me-time afternoons, when she locked herself in her master suite for hours, editing her saintly videos. I watched the indicator light on the camera in my room, a tiny, malevolent red eye. I knew its blind spots. I had spent weeks mapping them, my feigned, shuffling gait a perfect cover for my reconnaissance. I feigned a nap, my body angled away from the lens. Then, inch by agonizing inch, I rolled off the bed, staying below the camera's line of sight. I crawled. My 72-year-old knees screamed in protest, the fibers of the cheap rug scratching my palms. The main house was a tomb of silence, except for the faint, thumping bass of whatever music Chloe was listening to. I slipped into the study, the air still holding a phantom scent of my husband. My hands, trembling not from age but from adrenaline, found the book on the shelf. The false bottom came away with a soft click. There it was. A cheap black phone and a slip of paper with a number etched in Mark's precise handwriting. I took it back to my room, crawling again, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I waited until the dead of night, long after the house had settled, and the only sounds were the distant traffic and my own ragged breathing. I huddled in the bathroom, the one place without a camera, the cold tile a shock to my system. I powered on the phone. The low-tech screen glowed with an alien blue light. My fingers, clumsy with fear, punched in the numbers. It rang 3 times, each ring a lifetime. A man's voice, clipped and professional, answered. Davis. It was him, Mark's lawyer. A man I'd met only a handful of times, always impeccably dressed, always with an air of detached competence. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. Mr. Davis, I whispered, my voice hoarse. This is Anna Miller, Mark Miller's wife. There was a pause. Mrs. Miller. It's 2 a.m. Is everything all right? No, I said, the word cracking. Nothing is all right. I need your help. It's about Chloe, my grandson's wife. She's trying to take everything. She's telling everyone I'm losing my mind. I poured it all out in a desperate, whispered torrent. The fall, the feigned memory loss, the overheard phone calls, the petition for conservatorship I'd seen on her desk. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, clinical. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. It had lost its warmth and was now coated in a smooth, impenetrable veneer of legal caution. Mrs. Miller, he said slowly, I'm aware of the situation. To a degree, your granddaughter-in-law, Chloe, contacted our firm last week. My blood ran cold. She what? She reached out to inform us of your unfortunate decline in health. She was acting, in her words, in your best interest to ensure your husband's estate was managed properly given your new circumstances. It's a lie, Mr. Davis. She's the one creating the circumstances. My whisper had turned into a desperate hiss. Be that as it may, he continued, his tone unmoved. She provided us with a copy of a signed physician's report from your examination at the hospital, a Dr. Albright. The report is quite thorough. It diagnoses you with rapid-onset dementia and a complete lack of testamentary capacity. Testamentary capacity. The ability to make a will. The ability to be considered sane. The words hit me like stones. Chloe had been so efficient. That doctor only saw me for 10 minutes. I was acting, I pleaded. Mark told me to call you. He gave me a phrase. When the raven flies at midnight. Mrs. Miller, he cut me off, and for the first time, I heard a hint of pity in his voice, which was somehow worse than the dismissal. I understand this is a distressing time, but my hands are legally tied. I am bound by the evidence presented to me. Without definitive, verifiable proof of your lucidity, proof that can stand up in court against a signed medical diagnosis, I cannot act on your behalf. To do so would be a violation of my professional ethics. I am truly sorry. I would advise you to cooperate with your family. He didn't hang up. He waited. He was a wall. A smooth, polished, insurmountable wall of law, and Chloe had built it brick by brick using my own deception as mortar. The hope that had flared in my chest just moments before was extinguished, leaving nothing but cold, bitter ash. I ended the call without another word. I was utterly, completely alone. The days that followed were a unique form of psychological torture. My mind became a battlefield, and I was losing on every front. The primary front was the war against Chloe's cunning. She was a master of her craft. The more I needed to gather evidence of her cruelty, the more elusive it became. She seemed to have an almost supernatural sense for when my resolve was strongest. On those days, she would be the perfect angel from her social media feeds. She would enter my room, not with a clatter of a carelessly placed tray, but with a gentle knock. "Anna, are you awake, sweetie? I brought you some tea with honey, just the way you like it." She would sit by my bed, not scrolling through her phone but holding my hand, her thumb stroking my knuckles. "You seem a little more here today," she'd say, her voice soft as velvet. "It's so good to see a flicker of the old you." It was poison in a silver cup. Her gaslighting was so insidious, so perfectly executed, that it began to seep into the cracks of my own performance. There were terrifying moments of genuine doubt. I would catch my reflection in the darkened screen of the television, a vacant-eyed old woman with tangled hair, and a wave of vertigo would wash over me. Was this still an act? Had the mask started to fuse with my face? I'd find myself forgetting small things, where I'd put the burner phone, what day of the week it was, and panic would seize me. Was this Chloe's influence? Or was the doctor's report, in some horrifying way, coming true? The second front, however, was the war within myself. It was the agony of deceiving Leo. He was not the monster Chloe was. He was weak, complicit, a boy who had traded his conscience for a life of curated ease. But he was still the boy I had raised after his mother, my daughter, had passed. I remembered teaching him how to ride a bike, his scraped knees and triumphant smile. I remembered the nights I stayed up helping him with his homework, the pride in his eyes when he'd finally grasped a difficult concept. Now he would come into my room, his posture stooped with a guilt he tried to hide. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He'd fuss with my pillows, ask me if I was comfortable, his voice strained. He was playing his part in Chloe's production, and every hollow word he spoke was a fresh wound in my heart. One evening, he brought me my dinner, the usual bland, mushy fare. Chloe was out at some influencer event. He sat with me, the silence thick with everything unsaid. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and for a moment, I let the mask slip. I let my eyes clear, just a fraction, hoping he would see me, the real me. "Leo," I said, my voice quiet but clear. He flinched, his head snapping up. He saw it. For a split second, he saw his grandmother, not the empty shell Chloe had presented. His eyes widened, a flicker of hope and terror warring within them. "Grandma?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The temptation to break, to tell him everything, was a physical force, a pressure building in my chest until I thought my ribs would crack. I wanted to grab him, to shake him, to beg him to wake up and see the viper he had welcomed into our lives. But I couldn't. What proof did I have? A cryptic phrase, a dismissed phone call. It would be my word against his wife's, and she held all the cards, including a medical document that declared me insane. She would just use it as further proof of my delusional episodes. She would turn him against me completely and forever. So I did the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I let the light in my eyes fade. I let my face go slack. I blinked slowly, as if confused. The soup is cold," I mumbled, my voice reverting to the vague, disconnected tone I had perfected. The light in his eyes died. The hope vanished, replaced by a profound, heartbreaking sadness and resignation. He slumped in his chair, the moment gone. "Yeah, Grandma," he said, his voice flat. "It is." He had seen me, and I had denied him. The pain of that betrayal was a constant, gnawing presence, a self-inflicted wound that festered day by day. I was not only a prisoner in my home, I was a prisoner of my own necessary lies. My chance, my only chance, came from a place I least expected. Desperation had made me a keen observer of routines. I knew the name of the law firm from my call with Davis, Finch and Associates. I knew Chloe was careless with her mail. My one opening was the grocery delivery service. A young man named Kevin, who always had his headphones on and never made eye contact. He was perfect. He was invisible. I spent 2 days composing my message. It had to be short, cryptic, and something that only Davis would understand. I thought back to my life with Mark, to our private jokes, our shared history. There was one thing, a silly little thing. On our honeymoon in Florence, Mark had tried to buy a small, ugly painting of a one-eyed crow from a street artist. I had talked him out of it, and for the next 40 years, it had been our running gag. Whenever he made a questionable financial decision, I would say, "Is this another one-eyed crow?" On a scrap of paper torn from a magazine, I wrote in shaky, deliberate letters, "The one-eyed crow is about to be sold. A.M." It was a gamble, a shot in the dark. I folded the note into a tiny square and clutched it in my sweaty palm. The next delivery day, I timed my wandering perfectly. As Kevin was setting the bags down on the porch, Chloe was in the living room, filming herself unboxing a PR package. I shuffled out onto the porch, mumbling about the weather. Kevin ignored me, as usual. As he turned to leave, I stumbled, my hand brushing against his. In that split second, I pressed the note into his palm. He looked down, startled, his eyes wide. I put a finger to my lips, my own eyes wide with a plea he couldn't possibly understand. He hesitated for a heartbeat, then his expression smoothed over. He nodded once, a barely perceptible motion, shoved the note in his pocket, and walked away. For 3 days, I lived on a knife's edge of hope and despair. Every time a car slowed down on our street, my heart leaped. Every time the phone rang, I strained to hear. Nothing. I started to believe it had been for naught. The note was lost, or Davis had ignored it. The wall was still standing. Then, on the 4th day, another delivery arrived. Not groceries. A flower delivery. A small, anonymous bouquet of simple daisies. Chloe brought them in, rolling her eyes. "Probably from one of your old biddies at the senior center," she sniffed, placing them on my nightstand without a card. But tucked deep within the daisies, tied to a stem with a thin green wire, was a small, folded piece of paper. My hands trembled as I worked it free later that night. The note was typed. "Botanical Gardens, East Gate, tomorrow, 3 p.m., come alone." Getting there was the next miracle. I used my greatest weapon, my feigned weakness. That morning, I refused to eat. I complained of a headache. I was listless and unresponsive. By midday, Chloe was exasperated. "I need to get out," she whined to Leo over the phone, loud enough for me to hear. "She's driving me insane today. It's like taking care of a rock." An idea sparked. I started mumbling. "Garden. Want to see the flowers. Mark's flowers." I repeated it over and over, a broken record. Chloe's ears perked up. I could almost see the TikTok content forming in her head. A moment of lucidity, taking my sweet, confused grandma-in-law on an outing to a place that reminds her of her late husband. So many emotions. "You want to go to the garden, Anna?" she asked, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I nodded, my eyes vacant. "More flowers." It worked. It was a risk for her, but the potential for social media martyrdom was too great to resist. She bundled me into the car, setting up her phone on the dash to film parts of the journey. At the Botanical Gardens, she found a bench near the main entrance, a high-traffic area perfect for being seen as a devoted caregiver. "Now you sit right here, Anna. Don't move. I'm going to get us some water." She strode off toward a kiosk, her phone already in hand, likely starting a live stream. This was my window. I stood up on shaky legs and began my slow, shuffling walk. Not toward the main path, but away, toward the perimeter fence, toward the east gate. Every step was a prayer. I could feel the seconds ticking by. Any moment, Chloe could turn around. I saw him standing by the gate, a man in a simple trench coat, his back to me. It was Davis. He turned as I approached, his face a mask of professional neutrality, but his eyes held a flicker of something else. Concern. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice low. "Your note was intriguing. The one-eyed crow. Mark told me that story." "I had to reach you," I panted, my breath short. "She has a doctor's report. She's going to take everything." "It's more complicated than you think," he said, guiding me to a secluded bench behind a large hedge. "What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this bench. Do you understand?" I nodded, my heart pounding. "Mark was not just an accountant, Anna," he began, his voice dropping even lower. "That was a cover for the most part. In the late 2000s, he was an anonymous pioneer in a new emerging market, a private decentralized ledger for digital art. Think of it as a stock market for priceless masterpieces, but all the transactions are encrypted, anonymous, and stored on a secure private blockchain." I stared at him, bewildered. Digital art? Mark? He could barely use a VCR. He was a genius, Anna. A self-taught prodigy in cryptography and finance. He built a vault, a digital vault, filled with assets that are significant. Significant how? Davis took a deep breath. By our last conservative estimate, the contents of his vault are worth north of $100 million. The number didn't even register. It was abstract, meaningless. 100 million. It sounded like something from one of his spy novels. But then Davis delivered the part that made the world tilt on its axis. Mark was brilliant, but he was also paranoid. He knew people would come for his fortune, so he built a fail-safe into the very structure of the vault, a way to protect you. He created a protocol where the assets could only be accessed and liquidated by a third party in one very specific circumstance. He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle before he spoke them. Access is governed by a legally binding proof of incapacitation clause. The vault only unlocks for a designated trustee if the primary beneficiary, you, is declared legally incompetent by a court of law. The air left my lungs. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, deafening clang. Mark's plan, his genius plan to protect me, it wasn't just a failsafe. It was a roadmap. Chloe hadn't just stumbled upon a loophole. She was following a blueprint. The very legal maneuver she was using to rob me, the conservatorship, the doctor's reports, the declaration of my insanity. It wasn't just a way to get the house. It was the key. The one and only key to a $100 million kingdom. A key my own husband had forged, and that she was now about to turn in the lock. I felt a wave of nausea. My vision swam. So my faking it, my plan to expose her? I've been helping her? You've been unwittingly playing your part in his final act, Davis said, his face grim. But there's more, Anna. You need to prepare yourself. I looked at him, my mind already reeling, unable to comprehend what could possibly be worse. His expression was stone. Mark discovered something right before he died. He called me in a panic. This is why I responded to the note about the crow. He was pulling on a thread, and he found a monster. Chloe is not just a greedy young woman, Anna. She's part of a professional syndicate. Syndicate. The word hung in the air, cold and metallic. They're specialists, Davis continued, his voice a low, chilling monotone. They have spotters, researchers, forgers, and legal contacts. They target wealthy, vulnerable seniors with no close family. They identify the asset, and then they deploy an agent to get close. To infiltrate. Her marriage to Leo. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was a strategic insertion. Leo was the price of admission to get to you and to Mark's wealth. The image of Leo's sad, conflicted face flashed in my mind. He wasn't just weak. He was a pawn, a key. My love for him had been the lock they'd picked to get into my life. The pain was so immense, so sharp, it was a physical sensation. But Davis wasn't finished. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a terrible, shared knowledge. Mark told me he had proof of the syndicate, their methods, their other victims. He was going to bring it to me the day after he called. He didn't need to say the next words. I heard them anyway. I saw it. The memory of the police officer at my door, his hat in his hands. The clinical explanation of a slippery road, a loss of control, a tragic accident. It replayed in my mind, but the film was different now. The colors were dark, sinister. The screech of the tires was not the sound of a mistake. The shattered glass was not the result of chance. It was the sound of a planned, cold-blooded execution. Mark hadn't crashed. He had been silenced. The fight was no longer about a house. It was no longer about money I didn't even know I had. The faked dementia, the hidden cameras, the slow starvation, it wasn't just abuse. It was the methodical endgame of a murder plot. My grief, which had been a quiet, aching landscape for the past year, was consumed by a sudden, glacial rage. They hadn't just taken my husband, they had murdered him. And I was next. The game had changed. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was for justice. This was for Mark. Armed with the horrifying truth about Mark's death, the cold, calculated possibility of murder, and the vast, predatory network Chloe belonged to, my performance became my armor. The grief, the fear, the simmering rage. I packed it all down into a cold, dense star in the center of my chest. On the surface, I was nothing but a vacant shell. The game had changed. This was no longer just about exposing a greedy little shrew. It was about honoring my husband and dismantling a machine that fed on the vulnerable. Every action, every word, every blank stare was now a weapon. I was the perfect picture of dementia, a masterpiece of decline painted for an audience of one, broadcast through the unblinking eyes of her cameras. I mumbled to ghosts only I could see, tracing patterns on the tablecloth that weren't there. I'd call Leo by his father's name, then look confused when he corrected me. I became a creature of frustrating, harmless chaos. My greatest performance was the one involving Chloe's pristine white laptop, the command center for her digital life of lies. She had left it on the coffee table, furiously typing a caption for a photo of me staring blankly at a gardenia. The caption, I was sure, would be full of saccharine nonsense about the tragic poetry of a mind fading like a flower. I shuffled past, a glass of water trembling in my hand. My gait was unsteady, my eyes fixed on a point on the far wall. It was a simple, elegant motion. A stumble, a gasp, a cascade of cold water across the keyboard. A short, sharp electronic fizzing sound was followed by a silence more profound than any I had known in this house. Chloe's head snapped up. For a split second, the mask fell. Her face was a canvas of pure, undiluted fury. Her lips peeled back from her teeth in a snarl. Her eyes narrowed into venomous slits. It was the face of the woman who had spoken on the phone in the hospital, the face of a predator whose kill had just been spoiled. I saw it. I logged it away in the sharp, clear-as-day part of my mind she thought was gone. Then, just as quickly, the mask was back in place. Her face softened into a grotesque pantomime of concern. Oh, Grandma, sweetie, it's okay. It's okay. It's just a computer." Her voice was a thick, syrupy poison. She rushed over, not to check on me, but to snatch the dead laptop, turning it over and shaking it as if to dislodge the water, her movements frantic and tight with suppressed rage. I just stood there, my hand over my mouth, my eyes wide with a carefully crafted childish panic. "Oh dear, was that important? I saw a bird, a pretty red bird." "It's fine, Anna, it's fine," she gritted out, her smile a slash of red lipstick that didn't reach her cold, dead eyes. "Why don't you go sit down over there?" She pointed to my chair in the corner, the one she called my throne in her posts. She didn't look at me again, her entire focus on the inert piece of metal and plastic in her hands. She knew, I think, that she couldn't truly get angry with a poor, demented old woman. To do so would be to crack the facade. I had used her own narrative against her. I had cost her time, money, and a tool of her trade, and she could do nothing but smile through it. As I shuffled to my chair, I allowed myself the smallest, most secret of smiles. The spider had just snipped the first thread of the fly's web. I used her own surveillance system as my co-conspirator. The little black domes on the ceilings were no longer my prison guards. They were my witnesses. Chloe's neglect had become brazen. My meals grew smaller, blander. A plate with a piece of dry toast and a small scoop of watery scrambled eggs would be placed on the table. Chloe would then get busy, taking a phone call in the other room or staging a photo shoot in the garden, forgetting about me for hours. I knew the camera in the dining room had a wide, clear view, so I would simply sit there, staring at the plate. I wouldn't touch it. I'd just sit, a silent, pathetic statue of hunger, for as long as I could bear it. The timestamp on the video file would show the plate arriving at 8 o'clock a.m. It would show me still sitting there, untouched, at 11:30 a.m. When she finally remembered me, she'd rush in with a flurry of fake apologies. "Oh my goodness, Anna, you haven't eaten. You poor thing, you must have forgotten it was there," she'd coo, stroking my hair in a gesture that made my skin crawl. I'd look down at the plate as if seeing it for the first time. "Food?" I'd mumble. I was waiting for Mark. Each performance was a brushstroke in the portrait of her cruelty, a portrait she was filming herself. Sometimes, I would take one of the priceless art books my husband and I had collected, books I knew she and Leo were salivating over, and I would carelessly leave it on the floor, near a drafty window where the morning condensation gathered. I would watch from my chair as she walked past it, noticed it, and sneered, leaving it there to be damaged. Another piece of evidence, another verifiable record of her contempt for me and the things I held dear. I was a ghost in my own home, but now I was a ghost who knew how to haunt. I was turning her prison into my stage, and the star of her show was about to go brilliantly off script. The nights were my own. When the house fell into a deep, oppressive silence, after the click of the lock on my guest house door confirmed I was sealed away, the real Anna would emerge. The vacant stare would recede, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. The shuffling, frail old woman would vanish, and in her place was a woman with a mission. The bathroom was my sanctuary, my command center. The cold tiles on the floor seemed to ground me, the hum of the extractor fan a welcome cloak of white noise. It was the one place without a camera, the one place I was truly alone. My burner phone was my lifeline to the world, a small, black rectangle of hope I kept hidden inside the hollowed-out spine of an old copy of Moby Dick. Holding it in my hand felt like holding a weapon. Its weight was the weight of truth, of a future I was fighting to reclaim. Each night, I'd sit on the floor, my back against the cool porcelain of the tub, and I'd power it on. The small screen glowing in the darkness was like a campfire in a vast, lonely wilderness. My exchanges with Davis were clipped, encrypted, and terrifyingly real. We were no longer just planning a defense. We were orchestrating a counteroffensive. We were building a case not just against Chloe, but against the entire shadowy organization she worked for. My thumbs, which Chloe probably thought were only good for fumbling with a fork, flew across the tiny keyboard. "Davis, it's me. Are you secure?" The reply would come almost instantly, a small vibration against my palm. "Always Anna. Go ahead." She's getting bolder. The neglect is more obvious. Food is minimal. She leaves me alone for hours. The cameras are recording it all. Good. Let her. Let her build our case for us. The more arrogant she gets, the harder she'll fall. Have you seen any new paperwork? Anything related to the conservatorship? Not since the first forged application, but she's on her new laptop constantly. Financial sites, encrypted messaging apps. She's careful. Of course she is. The PI I hired is making progress. This is bigger than we thought, Anna. The syndicate Chloe is part of isn't just a ring of opportunistic grifters. They're professional, international. They specialize in what the PI calls inheritance acquisition. They identify wealthy, vulnerable seniors, insert an operative like Chloe into the family, and then systematically isolate and liquidate the assets. They have lawyers, accountants, even contacts in medical fields to help create fraudulent diagnoses. A chill, colder than the bathroom tiles, crept up my spine. This wasn't just about my art collection. This was a sophisticated criminal enterprise. Mark hadn't just stumbled into the path of a greedy girl, he had been targeted by a pack of wolves. Mark's accident, Davis. The PI, does he think? There was a long pause before his reply came through. He thinks it's a distinct possibility. The brake lines on Mark's car. The official report said they were worn, but he's looking for the original tow yard records. He thinks they could have been tampered with. He's a ghost, Anna. He knows how to find things that are meant to stay buried. I had to put the phone down for a moment, pressing my forehead against the cold bathtub. The air left my lungs. Murder. It was no longer a vague, horrifying suspicion. It was a line of inquiry, a case file. My grief for Mark, which I had held at bay, threatened to overwhelm me. But I couldn't afford to break, not now. I picked up the phone again. What's the plan, Davis? How do we fight this? We let her walk into the trap. The conservatorship hearing is our stage. She will present her mountain of evidence, your dementia, your inability to care for yourself, all meticulously documented on her own cameras. She will be confident, smug, the picture of a long-suffering caregiver. And that's when we pull the rug out from under her. How? She has doctor's reports. She has my forged signature. And we will have the truth. We'll have the PI's report on her syndicate. We'll have testimony. But most of all, we will have you, Anna. We need to get you out of there for a full, independent psychiatric evaluation just before the hearing. But to do that, we need to communicate with the outside world without her knowing. We need a physical link. A messenger. I looked at my own reflection in the dark screen of the phone. The face of a frightened, determined old woman sitting on a bathroom floor in the middle of the night. A digital ghost. But a ghost, I realized, is not enough. I needed a body. I needed hands in the real world. A new, desperate plan began to form in my mind, born of the hum of the fan and the cold, hard reality of the law. I knew exactly who my messenger would be. Chloe had built a fortress of isolation around me, but every fortress has a supply line. Mine came once a week, in a refrigerated van from a local high-end grocery store. Chloe prided herself on feeding me organic, nutrient-rich foods, a fact she loved to mention in her posts, even as she served me pitifully small portions. The delivery driver was a young woman, probably a college student, with tired eyes that held a flicker of kindness. Chloe would always make a show of the delivery, sometimes even filming it. "And here is Grandma's special delivery for the week. Only the best for my Anna," she would say to her phone, while the driver, a girl named Maya, would just stand there, looking awkward. I had been observing Maya for weeks. The way she'd give me a small, hesitant smile when Chloe wasn't looking. The way her eyes would linger for a second too long on my untouched lunch tray from the day before, still sitting on the counter. She saw things. She wasn't blinded by Chloe's performance. She was my only chance. The risk was immense. If I was caught, it would be all the proof Chloe needed that I was manipulative and paranoid, that my dementia was making me act out. It would be the final nail in my coffin. But doing nothing was a guaranteed death sentence of a different kind. I spent 2 nights planning the operation with the precision of a general before a battle. The weapon of choice was a single crumpled tissue. On a tiny sliver of its delicate paper, using the fine point of a pencil I'd managed to hide from one of Leo's old jackets, I wrote a message. The handwriting had to be shaky, but the words clear. It was a message for my oldest and dearest friend, Sarah Jenkins, a retired history professor I used to meet with every week at the Oakwood Senior Center before Chloe had cut me off from the world. The note was short, coded with a line from a poem we both loved. Sarah at Oakwood. The woods are lovely, dark, and deep. The raven is trapped. Tell the hawk to fly. It ended with a simple, desperate plea. Help me. The raven and the hawk were our code names for Mark and his lawyer, Davis, a silly inside joke from years ago that now felt like a prophecy. The day of the delivery, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I clutched the crumpled tissue in the sweaty palm of my hand, keeping it hidden in the pocket of my housecoat. Chloe, as expected, was in full influencer mode. She had her phone set up on a small tripod, the red recording light glowing like a malevolent eye. And Maya is here with our weekly goodies, Chloe chirped, swinging the door open. Say hello to everyone, Maya. Maya gave a weak wave at the phone, her expression strained. Just need a signature, ma'am. Of course. Anna, come say thank you to the nice young lady who brings your food, Chloe called, her voice dripping with false sweetness. This was it, my moment. I shuffled forward, my entire body trembling, partly from fear, partly from a very real surge of adrenaline. As I got close to the doorway where Maya stood with her electronic clipboard, I executed a maneuver I had practiced in my mind 1,000 times. I feigned a dizzy spell. My knees buckled slightly, and I stumbled forward, my body lurching towards Maya. Whoa there, Grandma! Chloe yelped, a flash of annoyance crossing her face before being replaced by practiced concern for the camera. In that one moment of choreographed chaos, my hand shot out as if to steady myself against the doorframe. As my hand passed by Maya's side, where her tote bag hung, I let the crumpled tissue drop from my palm. It was a whisper of a movement, a flicker of white that fell silently into the open canvas bag. I didn't look at it. I didn't look at her. I just leaned against the doorframe, breathing heavily. Oh my, I wheezed. So dizzy. Maya's eyes widened for a fraction of a second. I saw the flicker of understanding. Her gaze darted from my face, down to her bag, and then back to me. It was a silent, instantaneous exchange. She knew. She knew this wasn't just a clumsy old woman. Chloe rushed to my side, grabbing my arm. It's okay, everyone, she said to the phone, her grip on my arm painfully tight. Grandma just has her dizzy spells. We're managing it. Thank you, Maya. That will be all. She was already pushing me back inside, eager to end the live broadcast that had taken an unscripted turn. As she shut the door, I chanced one last look over my shoulder. Through the glass panel, I saw Maya turn to leave. She paused for a moment on the walkway, her back to the house. I saw her hand slip discreetly into her tote bag. Then she continued walking, her pace a little faster than before. The door clicked shut, and Chloe's sweet facade melted away. For God's sake, Anna, can you not be so clumsy? You almost broke my phone, she hissed, yanking her hand away from my arm. I didn't hear her. I was listening to the sound of the delivery van starting up and pulling away from the curb. The note was gone. It was out in the world. I had sent a message in a bottle, thrown from the shore of my island prison into a vast, unknown sea. I didn't know if it would reach its destination. I didn't know if this kind-eyed stranger would be brave enough to follow through. But for the first time in months, a sliver of genuine, unfeigned hope pierced through the suffocating darkness. The spider's web now had a thread leading to the outside. A crucial link in a chain Chloe never even knew existed was being forged. All I could do now was wait and continue my performance. The day of the conservatorship hearing arrived, not with a storm, but with the sterile, air-conditioned hum of institutional indifference. I sat in the wheelchair they'd provided, a prop in a play I had secretly written. The courtroom was paneled in a dark, somber wood that seemed to absorb all sound, all hope. The air smelled of old paper and faint, lemon-scented polish. I kept my head bowed slightly, my hands trembling just so in my lap. It was a tremor I had practiced for weeks, a subtle palsy of a mind supposedly lost to the fog. Across from me, Chloe was a masterpiece of performative grief. She was dressed in a conservative navy blue dress, her hair pulled back in a simple, elegant bun. It was a look designed to scream, reluctant, responsible caretaker. She had her phone propped up on a small tripod on the table beside her, the tiny red light indicating she was live. She had announced it to her followers as a difficult but necessary day, a hashtag-laden journey into the heartbreak of elder care. I could almost hear the saccharine sympathy pouring through the comments. You're a saint, Chloe, sending you strength. Poor Nana Anna. They were mourning a woman who wasn't dead and pitying a woman who was about to bring down the heavens. Leo sat beside her, a stark contrast to his wife's poised act. He was a crumpled, sweaty mess. His tie was slightly askew, and he couldn't stop fidgeting, his fingers drumming a frantic, silent rhythm on the polished table. He wouldn't look at me. He couldn't. His gaze darted everywhere else, at the bored-looking bailiff, at the flag in the corner, at the water pitcher sweating condensation onto a coaster. He was a man drowning in a shallow pool of his own making, and the tide was about to come in. Chloe's lawyer, a man with a practiced, sympathetic smile and a suit that cost more than my first car, began his presentation. His name was Peterson, and his voice was smooth as butter, spreading lie after lie over the proceedings. "Your Honor," he began, "we are here today with heavy hearts. Chloe and Leo Miller love Anna Miller dearly. This is not an action they take lightly." He gestured toward Chloe, who produced a single, perfect tear that tracked a glistening path down her cheek. The camera loved it. I'm sure her followers did too. "But Mrs. Miller's cognitive decline has become precipitous," Peterson continued. He clicked a remote, and a photo of me appeared on the large monitor, taken on the day of my fall. I looked dazed, confused, an easy look to feign when you've just deliberately thrown yourself onto a hardwood floor. This incident, a fall in her own home, was the beginning. Since then, her state has deteriorated rapidly. She has moments of profound confusion, of paranoia. She speaks of conspiracies, of being watched. He was good. I had to give him that. He was weaving a narrative from the threads of truth I had deliberately fed him. The cameras I had railed against, the vague muttering I had practiced, it was all being presented as evidence of my unraveling. "Chloe has done everything she can," Peterson droned on, his voice dripping with faux compassion. "She has managed her medication, prepared her meals, ensured her safety. She even installed a state-of-the-art security system to protect Anna from herself." He gestured to a stack of documents. "We have medical reports, signed affidavits from concerned neighbors Chloe spoke to, of course, and video logs." He played a short clip. It was me, sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a wall. I remembered that moment. I was actually mentally cataloging every piece of art in the house, cross-referencing it with the inventory list Mark had left me. To the camera, though, I looked vacant, a shell. "As you can see, Your Honor," Peterson said, his voice low and solemn, "the woman who once ran a library, who managed a complex life, is gone. All my clients wish to do is protect her, to manage her affairs, particularly the significant art collection left by her late husband, and ensure she lives out her remaining years in comfort and safety." Chloe dabbed her eye again, a perfect little gesture of sorrow. She glanced at the phone, a fleeting, triumphant micro-expression flashing in her eyes before being replaced by the mask of the martyr. She thought this was it. The final scene, the checkmate. I kept my gaze down, my hands trembling, my face a carefully constructed canvas of bewilderment. I let the silence hang in the air after Peterson finished his speech. I let the judge look at me, at this pathetic, broken old woman in a wheelchair. I let Chloe soak in her moment of victory, broadcasting it to her thousands of adoring fans. I let the trap become so enticing, so certain, that she couldn't see the steel jaws hidden just beneath the bait. Then, as the judge began to speak, a voice cut through the quiet courtroom, as sharp and clear as breaking glass. "Objection!" The word didn't just interrupt the proceedings, it shattered them. Every head in the room, including the judges, snapped toward the back of the courtroom. Standing there was a man who seemed to be carved from granite and integrity. He was tall, his gray hair was impeccably neat, and his suit was understated but bespoke. He radiated an aura of unshakable calm. It was Mr. Davis. It was my husband's hawk. Chloe's lawyer, Peterson, sputtered. "Objection? On what grounds? And who, might I ask, are you?" Davis walked forward, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. He didn't hurry. He placed a worn leather briefcase on the table in front of me and addressed the judge, his voice devoid of drama, but filled with an authority that Peterson could only dream of. "My name is Arthur Davis, Your Honor. I am Anna Miller's legal counsel. And my client is, and has always been, of perfectly sound mind." A collective gasp rippled through the small public gallery. Chloe's face, which had been a portrait of benevolent sorrow, froze. The smile lines around her eyes tightened into fissures of confusion and disbelief. On her phone's live stream, the comments must have been flying. "Counsel?" the judge asked, leaning forward, his previous boredom gone, replaced by intense focus. "Mrs. Miller has been declared unfit to retain counsel by 2 physicians." Physicians who were provided a carefully curated and frankly fraudulent set of symptoms by Mrs. Chloe Miller, Davis countered smoothly. He turned and looked directly at me. For the first time in months, I let the fog lift from my eyes. I met his gaze, and for a fraction of a second, a silent acknowledgement passed between us. The hawk and the spider. The plan was in motion. I straightened my back in the wheelchair. I stopped the trembling in my hands. I lifted my head and looked directly at Chloe. The confusion on her face was curdling into pure, undiluted panic. She saw me, not the vacant shell she had created, but the real me, and she was terrified. Your Honor, Davis continued, my client has been forced to engage in a rather elaborate piece of theater to protect herself from a predatory attack by her grandson and his wife. She has been a prisoner in her own home, subjected to emotional abuse, neglect, and gaslighting, all while her captor built a social media brand on her supposed suffering. This is outrageous! Slander! Peterson blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. He looked at Chloe, searching for a cue, but she was staring at me, her face pale, her mask cracking into a million pieces. It is not slander, sir. It is fact, Davis said, his voice dropping to a colder, harder tone. And we have proof. He gestured to the court clerk. With the court's permission, I'd like to present Exhibit A. He reached over and gently touched the antique silver brooch pinned to my dress, the one I had worn every single day, the one Chloe had often complimented, calling it a charming old-fashioned piece. This charming old-fashioned piece, Davis said, his eyes locking onto Chloe's, is a high-fidelity digital audio recorder with a 48-hour loop. My client, Mrs. Miller, has been documenting her reality for some time. I would like to play for the court a recording she made just last night, a sort of final monologue before today's hearing. He nodded to his assistant, who connected a small device to the courtroom's audio-visual system. The monitors, which moments ago had shown my vacant face, flickered to life, displaying a simple audio waveform. And then, my voice filled the room, not the mumbled, confused whisper of Nana Anna, but the clear, precise, and articulate voice of a retired head librarian. My voice. Log entry. Final. The date is October 25th, my recorded voice stated, calm and measured. The conservatorship hearing is tomorrow. Chloe believes she has won. She served me a cold, tasteless dinner of overboiled vegetables and a piece of dry chicken, all while telling her livestream followers that she was preparing my favorite meal. She and Leo believe I am asleep, but I am not. I am documenting. They think they are caging a dove. They do not realize they have trapped a scorpion. Chloe let out a small, strangled gasp. Her hand flew to her mouth. She fumbled for her phone to end the live stream, but her fingers were clumsy, shaking too much. It was too late. The world was listening. My voice continued, a relentless, factual indictment. The plan, as overheard and documented, is to seize control of Mark's art collection. They have forged my signature on the initial petition. They have isolated me, controlled my food, and used a network of cameras to create a digital prison. Leo, my grandson, is complicit in his silence and his greed. Chloe is the architect of this cruelty, a sociopath hiding behind a filter of compassion. This entire charade, my feigned dementia, was a strategy, a necessary deception to expose their plot. Let this recording serve as my testimony. I am Anna Miller. I am of sound mind and body, and this is my evidence. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket. Every eye was on Chloe. The blood had drained from her face, leaving a waxy, yellowish pallor. Her carefully constructed world had been demolished in 90 seconds. But Davis wasn't finished. The hawk was just beginning to circle. That, Your Honor, Davis said into the profound quiet, is merely the preface. He let the word hang in the air, a promise of more devastation to come. Chloe was still frozen, her mind visibly struggling to process the speed of her own destruction. The livestream was still running, a direct feed of her humiliation to the world. Davis took a slow, deliberate breath. The objective of this conspiracy was, as my client stated, to gain control of her late husband's assets, specifically, a highly valuable collection of digital art and NFTs, managed through a secure, encrypted digital vault. He paused, letting the judge absorb this new information. Mark Miller was a brilliant man. He was also a deeply cautious one. He understood that great wealth could attract predators, even from within one's own family. He therefore built a rather unique security feature into his will and the digital vault itself. He called it the Scorched Earth Protocol. The name itself seemed to make the room colder. Leo, who had been shrinking into his chair, now looked up, a new, more primal fear in his eyes. This was beyond his comprehension. The protocol was simple, Davis explained, his voice as dispassionate as a surgeon's. It was a dead man's switch, but a highly sophisticated one. The trigger was not his death, but any attempt to have his heir, Anna, declared legally incompetent for the purpose of seizing control of the assets. Such a move, specifically a fraudulent one backed by falsified medical reports and a collusive legal filing, such as the one submitted by Mr. Peterson on behalf of his client, would be interpreted by the system's AI as a hostile attack. Chloe's eyes widened. She was finally understanding. The trap wasn't just for her. It was a self-destructing mechanism she had triggered herself. "Your Honor," Davis announced, looking at the clock on the wall. The moment Mr. Peterson formally submitted the petition for conservatorship this morning, he initiated the protocol. As of 5 minutes ago, per the unalterable instructions coded into the trust, the entire collection, valued at approximately $150 million, was irrevocably and anonymously transferred to a charitable trust established to support victims of elder fraud. A choked sob escaped Chloe's lips. It wasn't a sound of sadness. It was the sound of pure, avaricious loss. The fortune she had schemed for, lied for, and abused for had vanished into thin air, vaporized by her own greed. But Mark's foresight went even further, Davis added, his tone becoming graver. He didn't just want to protect his assets. He wanted to ensure that those who attacked his family would face justice. The Scorched Earth Protocol had a secondary function. Upon activation, it compiled every file Mark had gathered on Chloe and her associates, transaction records, communications, evidence of prior schemes, into a single, encrypted file. That file was automatically delivered to a priority inbox at the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crime Division. He looked directly at Chloe, his eyes like chips of ice. "They received it 4.5 minutes ago. The game isn't just over, Miss Miller. A new one, with much higher stakes, has just begun." The blood didn't just drain from Chloe's face. It seemed to flee her entire body. She was a ghost, a specter of a woman, her horror broadcast live for everyone to see. The influencer, the angel of mercy, was exposed as a common, desperate criminal on a global stage. She finally managed to knock over her phone, the screen going dark, but it was far, far too late. The checkmate was complete, or so I thought. Then came the final, gut-wrenching twist, the one I hadn't anticipated. It came not from the calm, collected Mr. Davis, but from the sniveling, pathetic heap of a man beside Chloe. Leo shot to his feet, his chair screeching against the floor. His face was slick with sweat, his eyes wild with the terror of a cornered animal. His loyalty was not to his wife, not to the conspiracy. It was only and ever to himself. "She was going to frame me!" he shrieked, his voice cracking, hysterical. "It was all her! I didn't want to! She made me!" Chloe stared at him, her expression of horror shifting to one of utter disbelief. The one person she thought she had under her complete control, her pawn, her useful idiot, was turning on her. "Leo, shut up!" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper, but he couldn't. The dam of his cowardice had burst. "No! I won't go down for you!" he cried, fumbling for his own phone. His hands were shaking so violently he almost dropped it. "She told me they'd go easy on me, that I was just the grieving grandson, but she was going to pin it all on me." He finally managed to unlock his phone, his thumb jabbing at the screen. He held it up, his hand trembling. "I have proof. I recorded her." He stabbed the play button, and a new voice filled the courtroom. It was Chloe's, but not the public, honey-sweet version, nor the sharp, conspiratorial one from my brooch. This was her true voice, dismissive, arrogant, and dripping with contempt. Of course it's all in his name, Jessica, Chloe's recorded voice said, clearly speaking to a friend. The house, the accounts we set up. When this all goes south, if it ever does, the paper trail leads straight to him. I'll just be the loving wife who was manipulated by her greedy, stupid husband. I'll cry a few tears for the jury and walk away. Leo is my gullible little escape plan. He'll take the fall, and I'll be on a beach in the Maldives before he even gets his court-appointed lawyer. The courtroom was silent, save for the sound of Chloe's recorded laughter, a cold, ugly sound that echoed in the cavernous space. Leo stood there, panting, holding the phone out like a shield. He wasn't betraying me. I had been his target from the beginning. He was betraying her. It wasn't an act of conscience. It was the desperate final move of a rat chewing off its own leg to escape the trap. The weakest link had not just bent, it had snapped with a sickening crack, severing the last thread of their unholy alliance. The judge's gavel came down with a sharp, final crack. "Bailiffs," he said, his voice grim, "take them both into custody." And just like that, it was over. The performance, the abuse, the long, silent war fought within the walls of my own home. It all ended not with a bang, but with the pathetic whimper of a weak man trying to save himself. The chaos in the courtroom was not a wave, but an explosion. A concussive blast of sound and motion that radiated outward from Chloe. One moment she was perched on her chair, a mask of beatific concern plastered on for her live stream audience. The next, the judge's gavel struck the wood with the finality of a gunshot, and her world detonated. Her face, the carefully curated canvas of 1,000 selfies, became a grotesque masterpiece of shock. Her mouth opened, a silent O of disbelief, before a raw animal sound clawed its way out. The marshals moved in, their movements practiced and devoid of emotion. They were just doing their job, dismantling a life with professional calm. I watched, not with triumph, but with a strange, detached clarity. I saw the flashbulbs of the press photographers reflecting in the polished courtroom floor, turning the scene into a strobing, disjointed nightmare. Her nightmare, not mine. Her phone, still clutched in her hand, was her final betrayer. I could see the screen, the endless scroll of comments on her live stream, turning from fawning praise to a torrent of digital vitriol. The little hearts and thumbs-up emojis were replaced with snakes, with clowns, with knives. Hashtags were born in that moment. Hashtag courtroom. Chloe, #granny scammer, Ash, the fall of an angel. Her followers, the very people whose adoration she had weaponized, were now turning that weapon back on her, tearing her down with the same vicious glee she had shown me behind closed doors. It was a digital crucifixion, broadcast live to the world she had so desperately tried to conquer. Then came Leo. My Leo. He seemed to shrink in his chair, the fabric of his expensive suit suddenly too large for his frame. When the prosecutor called his name, he stumbled to his feet. He wouldn't look at me. He couldn't. He looked only at the floor, at his own polished shoes, as if they held the answers to how he had ended up here. His voice, when he spoke, was a reedy, pathetic thing. He presented the evidence, text messages, saved voice notes, that proved Chloe had a contingency plan. A plan to pin everything on him, to paint him as the mastermind and herself as another one of his victims, before she fled the country with a forged passport. He sold her out not for justice, not for me, but for a lesser sentence. It was the final, predictable act in his long play of cowardice. The last link in the chain of his weakness had finally snapped, and in that moment, I felt not anger, but a profound and hollow pity. He had traded his soul for a life he thought he wanted, and now he was trading what was left of it for a few less years in a federal prison. As the marshals led Chloe away, her perfectly styled hair now a mess, her face streaked with mascara, her wails echoing down the marble hallway, I finally met Davis's eyes across the room. He gave me a slow, single nod. It wasn't a celebration. It was an acknowledgement, the end of a war we had fought in the shadows. He had already explained the final, beautiful, terrible masterstroke of Mark's plan. The Scorched Earth Protocol. The moment a court officially recognized any fraudulent attempt to seize his assets based on a claim of my incapacitation, the entire 9-figure fortune was triggered to liquidate and transfer. Not to me, not to them, but to a portfolio of charities Mark had selected years ago. Foundations for the arts, shelters for the abused, research grants for neurological diseases. The money vanished like a ghost at sunrise. It was gone, all of it. Chloe's entire scheme, the years of planning by her syndicate, the degradation I had endured, it had all been for nothing. They had fought for a treasure that was designed to evaporate the second their greedy hands touched it. And the same protocol that vaporized the money also sent a complete, encrypted file on Chloe's entire criminal organization directly to the FBI. Mark had not just protected me. He had set a trap that would burn down the entire forest to catch the wolves. I never wanted the money. I just wanted my life. And in the echoing silence of that chaotic courtroom, I felt the first stirrings of it returning to me. The clamor of that day faded, first into a persistent ringing in my ears, and then, gradually, into a quiet hum of memory. The seasons turned, washing the city with the cool pastels of spring, then the deep, heavy green of summer. The noise was replaced by a different kind of sound. The gentle rustle of turning pages, the soft thud of a book being placed on a shelf, the murmur of a child asking for help finding a story about dragons. I didn't return to the grand house with its guest cottage. That place was a mausoleum of bad memories, its rooms haunted by the ghosts of lies. Instead, I found a small apartment on the third floor of an old brick building, a place where the afternoon sun slanted through the large windows and made dust motes dance in the air like tiny, golden fairies. My revenge wasn't a lavish victory tour. It was this, the quiet, simple peace of a life reclaimed, the freedom to make my own tea in the morning, to read until my eyes grew heavy, to walk to the local library without being watched. I started volunteering there 3 days a week. The scent of old paper and binding glue was a balm to my soul, a fragrance I've known since I was a young woman. It was a return to myself. I helped people find books. I reshelved returned stories. I sat in a comfortable chair and mended torn pages with delicate, loving care. I was no longer a character in someone else's vicious narrative. I was a librarian again. I was Anna. One afternoon, a letter arrived. The envelope was plain, the stamp standard, but the postmark was from a federal correctional facility in West Virginia. I didn't need to see the name on the return address. I knew. I carried it to my small kitchen table, the sunlight warming the polished wood, and sat with it for a long time. There was no fear, no anger, no flutter of anticipation, just a quiet curiosity, the way one might look at a fossilized insect, a relic from another era. Finally, I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out a single, folded sheet of prison-issue stationery. Unfolding it, I saw just 3 words, written in a shaky, unfamiliar hand. His hand. I am sorry. I stared at them. 3 words to cover a chasm of betrayal. 3 words to paper over the cruelty, the complicity, the theft of my dignity and my time. I thought of Leo as a boy, his hand in mine as we crossed the street, his laughter echoing in my old house. I thought of the man in the courtroom, his face pale with self-preservation, and I felt nothing. A vast, calm, and empty space where a wound used to be. The words were not for me. They were for him. A desperate, futile attempt to unburden his own conscience. I stood up, walked over to the small paper shredder I kept by my desk, and fed the letter into the slot. The machine whirred to life, its mechanical teeth grabbing the paper and pulling it in. It made a grinding, final sound, a zip that sliced his apology into 100 thin, meaningless strips. My revenge was never going to be a raging fire that consumed them. It was this, the quiet dawn after a violent storm. It was the profound indifference of my own peace. I went back to my armchair, where a new book was waiting, its spine uncracked, its pages full of possibility. I picked it up, feeling the satisfying weight of it in my hands. I opened it to the first, unwritten page of my own new chapter, and I began to read.